these Big Ten athletic directors and the Big Ten in general, they should, and I believe do, want they want the automatic qualifiers more than the SEC. And why is that? Because I think you could easily see a year in which the SEC gets 5 and the Big Ten gets just 3 in. That means less revenue for the Big Ten. Could it be 6-2? I wouldn't rule that out, but I have trouble believing it would be anything more beneficiary for the Big Ten than 4-4. I think that's the best case scenario for the Big Ten. 4 from the SEC, 4 from the Big Ten. So you're kind of, if you're the Big Ten, to agree to anything else is just worst case scenario. So you might as well fight for more, which would be automatically getting 4 bids in, automatically getting 5 teams in. So I think you're right on point, Caleb. And I know you're going to turn a column about this later today, but I think you're 100% on it.
So the Big Ten's reason, see, I'm going to take it a step further. We all thought the biggest reason was the automatic qualifiers would guarantee, when the Big Ten was worried they wouldn't get enough teams in, this gets more than usual, and then they don't get so outrun by the SEC. That was why, I don't know if you know this, Dave, a couple of weeks ago, the Big Ten said, the SEC wants the 5+11 format, 5 conference champions, just the 11 best teams after that. The Big Ten said, we'll get on board with that if the SEC moves to 9 conference games. So they're worried about the SEC taking slots from them, right?
Yep.
Well, here's the thing. It goes beyond that. They're not worried about the SEC taking slots from them. That's what we all thought. I did my own research recently, and they're worried just about the SEC getting more slots. It wouldn't affect their number of slots at all. It would just give the SEC more slots, and that's what they really don't. So let me give you an example just real quick. Let's just take last year's college football playoff ranking. I tracked this last year. 4 Big Ten teams got into the playoff, 3 SEC teams. Now, if you had the 16-team playoff last year instead of 12 teams, if you had the proposed SEC format, 5+11, you still would have had 4 Big Ten teams, but you would have had 6 SEC teams. Now, if you had the automatic qualifier format that the Big Ten wants, you would have had 4 Big Ten teams and 5 SEC teams. The Big Ten is not pushing the automatic qualifier format to make sure they get as many teams as they can in. They're pushing the automatic qualifier format to make sure the SEC doesn't get as many teams in as they can get in. Here's where it's clear. Because they're not pushing for just them to get 4 and the SEC to get 4. The real key is they're pushing for the ACC and the Big 12 to each get 2.
Exactly.
That way that takes stuff away from the SEC. That's what they want.
Exactly. And it's like a political thing, really. I mean, whoever you voted for, I don't really care. I don't want to get into that. But they all say something, but there's an ulterior motive, right?
Exactly.
So the Big Ten hasn't come out and said, we believe the ACC and Big 12 deserve 2 teams apiece, because it would be so transparent. You'd be like, oh, they're just trying to take spots from the SEC.
Exactly.
So they haven't come out and said that, but I guarantee you that's what they're arguing behind closed doors.
That is exactly what they're arguing behind closed doors. And you make a good point, Dave, that I didn't even think about until you brought it up. When this is where it is like politics. What's the first rule of politics if you're running a race?
I don't know. Lie a lot.
Know your opponent. Define your opponent. One of the most successful races that are run in politics, particularly presidential races, are ones in which the opponent is defined, in which someone defines their opponent before they even define themselves. The Big Ten and SEC think totally differently. The SEC solely thinks about what they want to do, maximizing revenue, adding teams, whatever. The Big Ten takes the SEC into account for every decision they've made. And let's be honest, Dave, that's probably why the Big Ten has been able to fleece the SEC to a certain degree on things like TV deals or stuff like that. They think when the Big Ten negotiated that TV deal, well, first of all, let's talk about Big Ten expansion. Why did they add UCLA, USC, Oregon, and Washington? Because the SEC went to 16. Then the Big Ten went to the television networks and made all these promises with them. They cashed in on the fact that CBS was bitter about losing the SEC and say, hey, we'll come. Why don't you give us Purdue Northwestern? And CBS stupidly paid $300 million for like Purdue Northwestern once a week in those type of games. But the Big Ten has consistently made decisions not just on what helps them, but on what can maximize hurt for the SEC. And I can't even blame them, because it's not just 2024, by the way. 2023, if you had the automatic qualifier, it doesn't matter if you had the 5+11 model or the automatic qualifier format in 2023. There would have been 4 Big Ten teams go in with this current setup with the conference as is. It's just there would have been fewer SEC teams go in. They're not worried about themselves. They do not want the SEC to take more shine from them. So it's as important to them to make sure the SEC doesn't maximize its potential as it is for them to maximize their potential.
I heard a recent interview with Greg Sankey, and I think he's a good commissioner. But I actually think
I disagree on that so badly.
I said good, not great or elite. I mean, you have to be good to be at the SEC level, right? Or you're going to get fired.
No, I think that's like, sometimes, Dave, have you ever, businesses where sometimes you can take over an amazing product and just still be good with it because it's impossible to screw up?
Okay, we'll agree to disagree there, but I think we'll agree on this. Tony
Barry Switzer won a Super Bowl.
Fair point.
Took over a good product, didn't have to do anything with it.
Yeah, and ate a hot dog during a football game one time. And during a football game, did you know that?
Yeah.
All right, I actually ate a hot dog. All right, so but whatever you think of Sankey, Tony Petitti's way better.
Significantly better.
Because he negotiated a better TV deal, and I don't think he shows his hand. I heard an interview with Greg Sankey recently in which you could hear the frustration in his voice with this automatic qualifier thing. I've interviewed him before where I could interview his frustration with the playoff format or other things. I don't really know. You talk about knowing your opponent. I don't really know where Tony Petitti stands because he doesn't show his hand. He's the guy that sits at the poker table. You're like, I have no idea what that guy's got. As fans, as analysts, we have no idea what that guy's thinking. We didn't know that he was going to sign that big of a television contract. The SEC certainly didn't know, or they would have signed one that was comparable. So I think that as much as I like Sankey, you don't. I think we can both agree that the Big Ten has an advantage there.
Yes. Sankey, and the crazy part is I thought Sankey was more of a politician than this and was better, but he's been giving away his hand a lot in how he feels because he's openly in public trying to negotiate playoff deals and SEC scheduling, and he's frustrated with the pushback from different leagues. The funny thing to me, Dave, is you notice the Big Ten is sitting back and letting Greg Sankey take all the heat for whatever college football playoff thing happens, even though the Big Ten is the one responsible for doing what everybody doesn't want. The number one format people don't want is the automatic qualifier format. And yet the Big Ten is letting the SEC take the blame for that. With the SEC, Greg Sankey doesn't even want that format. Greg Sankey just wants to move on and be like, please, let's clear this up. But like, he can't get his coaches in line. And here's where the root of it is, Dave. It all comes back to the TV deal. Because here's the real truth of the matter. The coaches in the SEC are trying to have their cake and eat it too, but they're mad at Greg Sankey for this deal. They want the 5+11 format. And they should, by the way. Because think about it, last year, Dave, if you had the 5+11 format, South Carolina and Ole Miss are in the college football playoff. If you had the automatic qualifiers, one of them's not going to get in. So they should want the 5+11 format, right? Yep. If you're Lane Kiffin or Shane Beamer. They want the 5+11. They also don't want a 9-game schedule. The Big Ten will only agree to a 5+11 format if they can get a 9-game schedule for the SEC. The only way the SEC can agree to a 9-game schedule and get the 9-game schedule is if, and by the way, this is how ESPN is reportedly willing to offer a lot more money and renegotiate the contract for that 9th SEC game. Because that's way more money for ESPN at that point. But you do have 8 fewer total games if you have a 9-game schedule. And for the conference as a whole. The schools don't want that unless there's a really good payout. So this all comes back to the fact that Greg Sankey negotiated a bad deal because the schools are saying, we're not getting the payout that the Big Ten are getting paid. Why would we agree to a 9th conference game for every other year for a school? That's one less home game where they can just bring in a bunch of revenue. And so they have to go out of their way to figure out a way to, and I don't know how he's going to do it, but Greg Sankey is really caught in a pickle now. And the reason he's in a pickle is because the coaches in the SEC want the 5+11 format, but they don't want a 9-game schedule unless the contract with ESPN is renegotiated and the payout's better. And I don't think you can get those two things. And by the way, you can't get the 5+11 format unless you go to a 9-game schedule. And I don't think they can get the 9-game schedule in the SEC.
The show represented by Banks & Jones, Tennessee trial attorney, banksandjones.com. Got a couple of people agreeing with Caleb. That doesn't happen as we broadcast live from the Ted Russell Ford Lincoln Studios, East Tennessee's largest volume dealer on Kingston Pike and Parkside Drive. Boy, I purchased my vehicle there, and I couldn't be happier. I was driving this morning thinking, I got such an incredible value for what I have, and I just can't thank them enough for being part of the program. Bank on it. The Big Ten athletic directors are trying to stick it to the SEC. I think we both agree on that. Brought to you by Commercial Bank, member FDIC, Life Made Better, CBTN.com. Anything to add to that final discussion before we get to stat of the day?
Yes, also bank on it. Not through any elite negotiation of Greg Sankey, but the SEC is going to win out, and we're going to see the 5+11 format next year. And the reason we're going to see the 5+11 format next year is because they will go to 9 conference games. The reason being, Dave, ESPN wants 9 conference games so badly. They would renegotiate that contract to get that extra conference game per school. That's just too much extra money for the 9th conference game. So
I won't argue with that.